Well, welcome back, everyone. I hope you guys had some good discussions. So we'd love to hear from each group. Just a few highlights, what stood out, what you guys talked about the most, and anything else you'd like to mention, any new ideas, initiatives, anything you'd really like to talk about. So if we could start with group number one, share a couple of your highlights, things you talked about.
Hey, I can report out. I am the newbie stakeholder, I think, in my group. And so I think I was asking questions and then others were answering them, thankfully. I think for where I'm working, and I work a lot with the local government and the public, so keeping things as simple as possible with things like visualizations and maps. We were looking at the NOAA Sea Level Rise Viewer, which would show people their own area of interest and what might happen with sea level rise, but you have to put some accretion or erosion rates in there to make it work right. So that's where I could maybe enter data from our set, even though it's not necessarily applicable to such a large region. At least it would be better than what we know so far. And then we started talking about the understanding the variability and uncertainty and how to interpret that and how to be able to describe that to local governments. How can this data be used, and what would be maybe extrapolating it too far? I was asking some questions about if it would be possible to extrapolate set data to remote sensing tools like satellite data or drone derived LiDAR. So we're discussing that a little bit, to maybe extend the geographic range that your set data could be applied. And Jenny was talking about how sometimes it's used to justify projects like restoration projects, or the need for those. I don't know. I think that's pretty much all we had. I'm excited to get into the data and start playing around with some of the data tools, but I haven't gotten into it yet. I'm sure I'll have a lot more questions.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I guess we can move on to group number two. If you guys have some highlights you'd like to share.
Hi, I'm Josh Breitup. I'm from Florida State University. Our group, one of our members unfortunately couldn't unmute, so couldn't really participate. But we basically kind of had a conversation about what the sets are in general, because a couple of our members hadn't worked with them at all, and this is sort of their introduction to them. And I think it's really helpful to have a conversation like that, because their questions were like, well, where do you get the data, and what can you do to inform decision making? And some of that sort of led us into conversations about things that we know and love about sets, which is that they take a lot of work and they take time. So you've got to think down the road in terms of the questions you want to ask or the management decisions you want to be able to make. I'm trying to think if there were other things, but that idea about basically how you communicate, like the process of setting up. So I just basically made a lot of references back to Laura's wonderful talk from before lunch, and some of those resources to look at just in general what a set is and what kind of questions we can look at with that. And I don't know if the other guys are on, if there's anything they want to add to that.
Josh, I think you did a good job at summarizing the discussions.
All right.
I'm glad you guys were able to have that conversation and explain the SET data and things around that. That's really good. I guess we can move on to group number three if you had some highlights too.
Sure. We talked a fair amount. Also about the idea of it would be really neat to combine the data that we're getting from these SETs with the NOAA sea level rise projection. And if you can combine that elevation information and projected sea level rise, and then also the trends and what the sediment elevation is doing, that could be a very powerful tool. And we talked about how there are a lot of implications where SET data could be useful, for instance, in coastal planning for sediment management and dredging and inlets, and how that's impacting the adjacent salt marshes and mangroves. But we also talked about how it's often not used at this point in time, either due to it's hard to find the data or just you're unsure how to use it. So a lot of what our uses right now are, conceptual and but there's a lot of potential use to put the information into practice in a lot of different areas for management. And if anyone else wants to chime in, feel free.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I know there's a lot of work going on with the new data visualization platform, so hopefully those kinds of things could be implemented there somehow. And we can move on to group 4.
So group 4 was mainly me being the old guy and a couple of newer practitioners. So I was on my soapbox and passing along some of the knowledge that I've gained about SETs over the years, and given my SETs, I guess I'll go ahead and give it. So don't shoot me, but this is kind of my comparison. SETs are like living shorelines. SETs are fads. It's a fad. And they're like living shorelines because, in my mind, living shorelines are fads. But they're a tool, and they're a good tool if you do a lot of good planning up front and you stick with it long term. You'll get results. So you've got to have planning up front. And I guess my other big soapbox item for SETs are wonderful at taking relative elevation change. And as researchers, y'all know what I mean. Relative elevation change. You have to have a question in mind. If you're doing multiple plots, you manipulate a plot and say, okay, does this change the elevation? Some type of manipulation, whether it's vegetation manipulation, you put in different vegetation types, things like that. It's really good for that. But it is really bad for absolute elevation change. And you're not going to get the elevation change of an area of a big marsh, with a 2 meter square, with 3 2 meter square areas that you're reading, every 4 months or every 6 months or even every year. It's not going to give you absolute elevation change, but relative elevation change. It'll give you. The other thing that SETs are really good for, that I've seen a lot of really good uses for, is event-driven elevation change. Meaning, like, if you have a flood event, a sedimentation event, a hurricane, things like that, and you have SETs, if you have pipes in the ground, then it's really good at recording what happened. What happened there. So, and I'll throw some of the papers that I've pointed out with all of this into there. And then there's also new processes coming out where you pair your SET pipe with a total station or an optical level to help you get that absolute elevation change of a larger area. And I have a paper that I'll throw in the chat about that. So that's pretty much what Group 4 did. Anything else to add?
That was a good summary. Thanks.
All right, thank you for that. And group 5.
Hey, I can share a few takeaways from Group 5. This is Katie Luciano with the South Carolina Geological Survey. And Group 5 was myself and Aaron Rogers with Audubon. And Aaron works in the Charleston area just like I do. We know each other from a couple different collaborative working groups. So we were able to chat about upcoming plans for our Socorro set installations, which was fantastic. I think other than that, we also spent quite a bit of time talking about probably question 2 about making set data easier to understand or use. And in terms that we talked about the data visualization tool that Riley showcased earlier and how useful something like that is to managers and people who are looking to get kind of an overview. Uh, we did talk about how, when you're a practitioner and you're actually out collecting the data, you start to get an association with each of your stations, and you can sort of see outliers in your data set. So we talked about, maybe having with the data visualization, having something that's more generalized. And then for people who want more information, having an option that's sort of diving in deeper. And then also giving a way of highlighting sort of like caveats or outliers in the data set that maybe the people collecting the data would identify. We also talked about restoration projects and how SCT data could be useful, and data visualization platforms could be really useful for grant applications, for coastal restoration projects. And I think that's about all. That's about all I had. Erin, did you have anything? Was there anything that I missed?
No, that was a great summary. Thanks, Katie.
Awesome.
Thank you, Katie. And group 6, you have any highlights you'd like to share?
Let's see if the camera will come back on. Sort of. We had technical issues with being able to unmute, so kind of made it work with one person talking and typing into the text box, the chat box for things. But really, our group was all data collectors, researchers, not end users. So it was a limited conversation, but it was most like after decades of data collection, like Ches was saying earlier, what do you do with it? How do you work with the data? And what we noted was we're looking at new entrants into the field and older folks, and are there the API question for accessing data earlier? What file types can everybody access? Is everybody storing things in Excel? Or is there some grantor somewhere like NSF that has a file type that might limit other people's ability to access the data? The next thing was internal formatting. There's been a template floating around for years now that's set up for horizontal data entry and calculations, and some people think vertically about things. Or it's easier to run formulas one way than the other in the Excel spreadsheet. That might be project driven more when it comes down to it on what you need the data to do. And then the last thing's the data collection intervals. Monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, annually. What are the interpretive implications of collecting that data? Or is everybody seeing the same trends? How long do you need to collect the data? So that's the short and sweet from ours.
Thank you so much for sharing. So thank you everyone for your input and being a part of this conversation. I did have a last question to everyone. Is there anything that didn't come up today that you feel is really important in improving stakeholder engagement with the SCT data? Or anything else you'd like to mention before we wrap up things?
I'll just say one thing. This is Beth again from Belt Hill Conservancy. Maybe this exists. I apologize if it does, but a really nice diagram of the set on a web page or something that's really easy to import into presentations, that maybe has some little text boxes explaining the different parts of it and what they're used for, or something that's, an interactive diagram might be nice. That would make it easier to just, I think I was copying and pasting things out of the MPS protocol, which was great, but there might be something nicer that I'm just unaware of.
Anyone else have any other last thoughts?
Beth, if I could just chime in, we are adding to the Sakura SET resource hub page. I do encourage you to check it out. I'll repost it, but if all of you have other sources, we'll add the ones from Laura's talk. We really do want to make that page as useful to stakeholders as well as possible. So do let us know. But Beth, I think between Will, Katie, Chess, Michelle, Jenny, you have lots of people who will give you photos, George, for any of your presentations.
Okay, well, thank you again, everyone, for being so open to this discussion. We're all taking in your feedback and we'll hopefully be using it to make SET data more useful, usable, and accessible and meaningful to the communities and all the contexts you guys work in. And also for more resources and more updates, we'll always be putting that on the SET Community of Practice webpage at Sakura. And right now we will be going into a short break until 2 o'clock. So we'll be back for our next session on data and metadata.